part of what we've been seeing from around the world is that women everywhere recognize that the impact of COVID is going to have a devastating effect on women who are already in a place of great disadvantage in world economic terms. I was given some facts for Australia from Snap Forward, the Feminist Policy Network. And as I was reading them, I was thinking, well, this is just so like the UK and so like Europe and so like the US. And it's a panoramic picture of financial jeopardy, which results in something which makes us have even greater urgency about saying we need to take command and control over female economics and approach them from a completely different angle. 55% of women, of people who were unemployed in the last month in Australia are women, and the majority of them are part-time workers. So they were already on poor wages. The frontline essential workforce in the pandemic are, of course, largely women. They're in healthcare, in age and disability care, early childhood education, teaching, cleaning, retail. Women perform the majority of the jobs that are dealing with caring, making Australians healthy, safe and nourished, but they're undervalued, poorly paid. And of course, they reflect the fact that women also do domestic labour at a much greater level than men and aren't paid at all for that. And then, of course, these unpaid workers or low paid workers are performing the largest share, not just of domestic care at home, but usually they've also got major responsibility for community care, elderly care around them. And so think about that just in terms of mental stress, as well as undervaluing their actual economic potential. And of course, if you're a Black woman, a woman of colour, a woman from the First Nations, a young LGBTQA woman, then you're going to be experiencing even greater jeopardy. And many of these women who are experiencing violence as well brings another level of vulnerability. And all of these things intersect to make women really hard done by in terms of being able to have any level of economic independence or stability. So how can we make that change? I had a huge conversation with Sandy Okoro from the World Bank and said, look, here we are. We've given from governments the greatest fiscal stimulus to the world that it's ever seen, from governments right across the world. And she said, yes, those fiscal stimulus, all of that needs to be done through a gender lens. And I said, and is it? Is that happening? And she said, well, actually, no. No, it is not being done through a gender lens. So we're coming to this panel, Economy 3, to see if they can sort all that out. Because there's no doubt about it that we can't operate from the same paradigms that we've been operating on so far. Otherwise, if we were, we wouldn't be in this situation. So I'm handing over at this point to the chair. It's Cathy Hunt, who's the executive director of One Mind and the executive producer of WOW Australia. She spent her life working in the cultural economy in the UK, in Australia, New Zealand and Hong Kong. She's a producer, a festival director, a cultural strategist and a consultant and a friend, to me certainly. And she's assembled a great group of women to talk about this. So Cathy, welcome and thanks to you. And let me hand over at this point to Solve the Economy.
Thank you, Jude, once again. And I can't believe it, Jude. Not only have you asked us to solve the economy, but you actually put us on immediately after Annie Lennox. And I thought, well, that was great. That's a fantastic bit of programming. Thank you so much. So we're coming to you today, and I'm coming to you today from the Turrbal and Jagera lands in Australia. And I pay my respects to those traditional owners of these lands and to elders past, present and emerging. Yes, I'm delighted to be facilitating this because, yes, I've worked in the cultural economy all my life, but one of the things that has been really a passion for me has been looking at finding different ways of doing things, different ways of funding, financing and thinking about that particular part of the economy. And yes, it is very much part of the economy. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, Jude went through some of the stats and some of the facts, but it just seems that regardless of politics, regardless of health impacts, regardless of culture or location on the planet, this is going to impact women and girls the hardest, without a doubt. And as we've heard from the discussions over the past 24 hours, there appears to be very little of desire from many of our leaders to actually place a gender lens on any of the solutions. Whether it's just, I mean, Jude mentioned there the fiscal solutions that are being used at the moment in relation to COVID, but what about the economic recovery that we're actually going through, and who's putting a gender lens on that? Or certainly one that's going to be inclusive of all citizens and aligned with the UN sustainability goals. But does it have to be like that? What have we learned from this crisis about how we wish to live? How women and girls can create more financial security for themselves and their families, be engaged in driving businesses that can lead to a better place in the world, and a world maybe where we don't have to worry about these crises wrought by the forces of nature, such as climate disasters or pandemics, because in doing so, we might have changed our relationship with the planet. So instead of thinking about innovation, which is what we're going to be talking about today, just as another advance in technology, why can't we think about changing the thinking about innovation into a much more holistic way as our approach to designing the economies that we actually wish to have in the world that we wish to live in? As the wonderful Australian opera singer Deborah Cheetham said this week, I want to live in a society with an economy, not in an economy with a society. And I just thought that was very telling in relation to the rhetoric that we're now getting from many governments around the world. So I'm going to introduce you to three amazing women that I'm going to have a chat with. And I'll introduce them very briefly now, and then they can introduce themselves in much more detail when they talk about their work. And after that, we're going to go to a pre-record. So the three women that I'm going to talk to on this panel today are Leanne Kemp, here with me in Brisbane. Well, not actually here with me in Brisbane, but in the same place as me, who is the founder and CEO of Everledger, and also Queensland's chief entrepreneur here in Australia. Ayla Hoyter, youth innovator for the Southern Initiative, a team of people in Auckland City Council using new methods of social innovation to create social and economic transformation in South Auckland. And I must say, Ayla, thank you so much for joining us today. Ayla's had to step in very quickly for a colleague who had to pull out for personal family reasons. And Tumaya Juwita, the Executive Director of the Indonesia Business Coalition for Women's Empowerment over in Jakarta. Great to see you. Great to have you with us, Maya, today also. So before we get to the conversation, we'll start with a pre-record from Khara Jabola-Carolus, the Executive Director of the Hawai'i State Commission on the Status of Women, on the development of what is the first explicitly feminist recovery plan for the economy post-COVID-19. Over to you, Khara.
Aloha, my name is Khara Jabola-Carolus, and I greet you from the Hawai'i State Commission on the Status of Women in Honolulu, Hawaii. The Commission on the Status of Women is a statewide government agency in the United States that is committed to restoring the venerated status of women, femme-identified, and non-binary people in Hawaii. We are the first government to propose a feminist economic recovery from COVID-19, and that was really important because in a sexist society, we know that if it's not explicitly feminist, then it's going to be patriarchal. And we were determined not to return to the gender hierarchy that, compounding with other crises across the United States and the world, brought us to this moment. We wanted to also counteract a disturbing trend that we're seeing, especially with fascist regimes exploiting the crisis to undermine democratic processes. As a feminist government agency, we wanted to model a community-based collaborative process in responding to the crisis and also to define the plan out of it. So we have what's called the Feminist COVID-19 Response Team at the state level that was convened by an official government agency here. And this team is made up of women from beyond the academe and beyond the elite space of government. It included community activists and organizers and other service providers who are seeing the impact on the ground level and know what's best in terms of building out of this emergency. And so for us, we agreed that we did not want to rebuild the economy. We want to rebuild our relationship to women and land that has been broken by patriarchy and Western colonization, first and foremost. We also wanted to center the majority of women who are working class. So the key feature of this plan is really about reorienting our economy away from a tourism trap, from militarism, from luxury development and other harmful and sexist industries in Hawaii, and instead focus on the needs of women. So building out, finally, meaningfully, a maternal care infrastructure, childcare, elder care, that revalues these species essential activities and also provides jobs that need to be prevailing wage, unionized, and non-precarious, as we've seen us struggle with through this crisis. What's really important is making sure that we finish the battle of our foremothers in creating economic self-sufficiency for women, survival that's not tied to work. Women's value is not as workers. We want to make sure that things like universal basic income become a reality. This has been over a century of feminist struggle. It is not like the brocialist stereotype of 2016. Even in Hawaii, Queen Liliuokalani advocated for this. Another key feature is repairing historic harms to Native Hawaiian communities and guaranteeing that they have a portion, a 20% portion of all federal monies coming in. These are just some examples of the plan that we put forward, which we believe is possible. In Hawaii, there was a pantheon of women gods. The great spiritual and political leaders were women, and the last leader to helm Hawaii before the overthrow of the United States of Hawaii's government was Queen Liliuokalani. I say that because it's important to remind ourselves that a feminist future is not impossible or utopian if it already existed. So we hope that you'll be in touch with us for support and for guidance, and that we can celebrate you for passing your own feminist recovery. Aloha.
Wow, what a way to start. I mean, that is some amazing statement from Hawaii, and thank you so much, Khara. A couple of, just three, I'll mention three of the points that are actually in that plan a bit just before I pass to Leanne. So the first, we're orientating the economy away from sectors that have harmful practice. One was investing in businesses built on traditional cultural and land management practices. And the third that I've picked up on is provide capital for women-led businesses, and in particular, micro and smaller businesses. So I just think it would be really good to just think about everything that Khara said, but I thought I'd pick up on those before throwing over to you, Leanne, to talk about, obviously, the amazing work that you're doing in the innovation space.
Yeah, thanks, Cathy. It was very wise words to be spoken out of Hawaii, something that, of course, as they bear the torch moving forward, we can all walk in the light of their policy changes. I'm Queensland's chief entrepreneur, the founder of my own startup or scale-up company that operates in 6 countries of the world, but I'm also one of the global chairs for the World Economic Forum. And what touched me in the words and the sentiment that was just shared is certainly what was also depicted in the start of this new decade, and that is the movement from shareholder value to stakeholder value, the consciousness and understanding that, you know, every single company, organization, even community engagement needs to sort of broaden themselves to understand not only the responsibility to shareholders if you're a CEO of a company, but also to people and planet. And it's no longer acceptable just to see a supply chain as first level supply. We need to start asking the questions, where does it come from and who has been involved in that extractive industry, and or what has been the conditions upon which those that have worked, which has really been my lifelong commitment to the journey that is Everledger today. And technologies that are available now are mature enough to be able to solve some of the greatest challenges of our time, the world's to-do list, as they say. And in Queensland here, we have about 35,000 startups and innovators that interact with the Chief Entrepreneur's Office. We're appointed by the Premier and the Minister for Innovation to be the connective tissue across the state. And Queensland is the largest exporter of goods and services, far greater than New South Wales and Victoria combined. We're a custodian of the Great Barrier Reef. And of course, we have incredible natural resources, but at the core of anything to do with innovation is talent. So we have amazing natural talent, which is the entrepreneurial community to help leverage out and really lean into some of these challenges of our time.
It's great. Talk about circular economy for a minute, Leanne, and how you talk about that.
Yeah, look, I've been working in sustainability, climate, environment for the better part of the last decade, and fair to say we've seen incredible footage and commitment to climate change. But what's really been the struggle is what's the economic principles that sit beneath it. We know and the truth of the scientists that we have been, pronounced and been told. But the unfortunate nature of governments and even businesses, it needs to make business sense. So circular economy is exactly that, an economic vehicle for change that makes sense. How do you enable reuse, repurpose, even redesign in a manufacturing end for this karmic circle of use of resources? And finally, we're in a stage of the world that whilst we're grappling with COVID, we're fast coming out of course, parts of the world are starting to go into an economic recovery, particularly Australia and even China. We will find probably a vaccine for COVID, but the challenges with our globe and Earth and what is happening with climate, I'm not sure that we really have a vaccine for that. It is one of the greatest viruses of the planet, and we need to solve for it. And there's an economic vehicle now that makes perfect sense.
And in a previous conversation with you, we talked about the whole issue of local manufacturing and PPE, and that comes out quite strongly in the Hawaiian feminist policy as to why are we not all manufacturing PPE in a local way. You talked, I think, about how that particular supply chain has been very influenced by or is in the hands of the defence force, and there are issues there that need to be changed in relation to how we do that would also benefit us all.
My life is mostly spent hopping across major cities and nations in the world working with my business of Everledger. We provide traceability systems. We track diamonds from the source of the mine right the way through to the retail network. And we care about Mother Earth's assets, those finite resources, whether it be rare earths. It is interesting right now, we're starting to see a lot of conversation with thought leaders in the world and prime ministers and ministers and even presidents talking about manufacturing. It is one of the major contributors to climate, but it's also one of the most critical and fundamental parts of the consumer supply chain. Up until COVID, typically defence was looking at, the arms race to protect our borders. But right now, our ability to be able to keep our citizens healthy, hence supply chains like PPE and even ventilator machines is now becoming a critical national security concern. I'm excited because I would say I've worked in supply chain technologies for 25 years and never before have I heard prime ministers or presidents talking so excitedly about manufacturing and supply chains until now. So it is an increasingly important time to also understand that we're moving from supply chains. It's been a race to the bottom, cheaper, better, faster. If not India, move to Malaysia. If not Malaysia, let's move to another country. But the reality is every country, particularly Australia, is now starting to say we can't compete on price, but perhaps we can compete on durability. If there's a way for us to embed circular economy beneath the product, our products will last longer. But not only that, we would be able to then use it in a second, third and fourth time use. It will create an incredible economic stimulus that, fair to say, will be for every rural and regional town centre because, let's admit it, we all have waste. And so the challenge for us is to bring together material science to see what one person's waste is another person's input and value. So it's a pretty exciting time, I think, to be an innovator.
Great. Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much, Leanne. Halo, if we can come to you now over the ditch, as we say in Aotearoa, to talk about the amazing work that Auckland City Council and the Southern Initiative have been doing.
Yeah, kia ora koutou. So I'm a youth innovator in the Southern Initiative at Auckland Council, and our focus is on South Auckland and West Auckland, which is the most marginalised Polynesian Māori communities in Auckland. So we have some of our biggest challenges right in my own backyard. Our key focus areas are shared prosperity, innovation and technology, healthy infrastructure, and tamariki wellbeing, so the well-being of our babies and giving them the best start in life. My specific focus is on rangatahi, which is youth, and the way I've been disruptive in that space is figuring out how do we engage our youth and change the way we value them. So getting them to be a part of decision-making processes, but doing it in a different way. So we've created this platform and been piloting it for the last 2 years. It's called Up South, and through the platform, we have been able to engage nearly 5,000 rangatahi where they're able to share their ideas and be creative, and they contribute towards different projects councils running, and every person that contributes, they're incentivized, so they get a little bit of koha, which is pocket money, and a chance to be selected and earn more money. So it's a way of giving them a little bit of part-time work, I guess. Most of those users are around 13 to 21 years old, so they're really young. So that's a different way of engaging with our youth, and it works because it's done through a platform that is similar to social media as digital natives, so they like it that way, and they also have the chance to be creative and upload videos and pictures or whatever they like to create, dance. So yeah, my work has been supporting youth, incentivizing their work, changing the normal way traditional does our council does business as usual, and trying to reframe how we work. So using some of our Māori principles to guide the work that we do. Yeah.
No, it's fantastic. But what you're doing at the same time is that you're actually bringing young people into the decision-making process themselves, aren't you? So it's a way of actually getting a group of people who are actually almost excluded from the system at the moment, and in particular excluded from the system of talking about the world in which they want to live in and the nature of the jobs that they might have and where they might go in the future into decision making.
Yeah. The users that we reach are the most hard to reach. So Māori, our young Māori and Pacific students are the ones who are never involved, hardly ever involved in council decision-making processes. And the traditional way of those processes was public meetings or surveys or researchers going out and reaching a certain group, but it wasn't ever reaching our young Māori MPIs. So through this platform, I think they're empowered to be involved because it's a safe place. It's culturally safe as well and encouraging to them, and they get incentivized by earning a little bit of money to be engaged. So that's a real different way of council engaging with anyone.
Right, and from what I understand, so the Southern Initiative is the whole your whole team is actually the economic development arm of council, isn't it? So it's thinking about economic development in a very different way and a very different starting point in terms of who the decision makers are and what it is that they want to do in the world today. So I think it's just an amazing project, and I urge everybody to go and have a look at Southern Initiative and Auckland City Council.
And
yeah,
Tanya would have talked about the work they're doing with He Waka Eke Noa and the shared prosperity, and using council levers to create employment opportunities for Māori and Pacific owned businesses. Yeah, that's the mahi I think Tanya would be better to explain.
but you're here now. Can you explain it to us? Can you explain how it works?
Okay, so He Waka Eke Noa is a group that has brought together Māori and Pacific owned businesses. They've brought together 54 so far, and they're joining these groups with different stakeholders and council departments, so that those departments, whatever big projects they have coming up create the job opportunities, and they have to provide those opportunities to these Māori and Pacific owned businesses first. That's my
Yes. Yeah.
understanding of it. It's not my project, so I
Yeah.
don't know all the details about it.
That's okay. That's okay. Don't worry. I just wanted, because that in itself is a procurement project, and it's very much is linked, very similar to obviously the work that we do here in relation in Australia with First Nations procurement, and that our good friends here in Australia, Fem Economy, are doing in relation to women-owned businesses. And I think that is again one of the great levers that governments and major corporations can play today in terms of developing women in business, is to actually look at their procurement policies and look at their procurement policies also for how they impact on or how they get to smaller businesses, because it's often smaller businesses that happen to be those that are run by women or created by women. So I think that the whole procurement piece is a major part of the change that we need to have. So finally, I'll come onto you, Mayor, to talk about what is happening in Indonesia at the moment, and in particular the work that you're doing on women's empowerment in the more, as I understand it, in the mainstream. You say yourself, in the corporate sector and with major businesses, and just exactly if you could explain to us how Indonesia and women in Indonesia are actually coping at the moment with the COVID situation, because to be honest, we've heard very little about what is happening, and it would be good to know.
Okay, thank you for having me, Cathy. The other thing, the things that I want to share from our work here, that I mean, in Indonesia, I mean, just like on the rest of the world, that how the government put on the a lockdown in several cities, and even closing the school. And the school closure, it's exacerbate women's unpaid care work or domestic responsibility, as we say, as the primary caregiver for children. And it's exert a disproportionately impact on working women. The problem is especially even severe for single parents household that may be left with no income at all if the mother, as a sole earner, is forced to stop work to care for children. So that's the situation in Indonesia. Well, the government of Indonesia, even before COVID-19, it's already have, I would say, it's a law. It's already putting a law based on ILO that this for non-discrimination for men and women on getting a job, and even on the pay job. But the gender gap still happening, mostly because women are on the low level of the job. Just so this is so inclined with what Khara said from the Hawaii State of Commissions on women's there, that a woman is often on the low pay of the job, while the higher level pay of the job is still occupied by men. Most of the jobs. So my organization, it's Indonesia Business Coalition for Women Empowerment. It's basically try to do beyond what the government said about the gender, about the pay between men and women, by encouraging businesses, especially the big one and corporation, to adopt the workplace gender equality on how providing more room, especially for their female talents, to be stay at the workforce or even entering the workforce, and by recognizing their domestic responsibility, and providing some kind of a room for them to grow, and some kind of room to recognize this domestic of responsibility. Well, COVID-19 is actually putting some kind of I would say leverage or platform for this flexible working arrangement to be put in place, because all of a sudden everybody has to work from home. Everybody has to do the working from home, and companies all over the world, and especially in Indonesia, are struggling on how to put the system in place. We did a rapid survey a couple of weeks ago, when we started the city lockdown a couple of days ago, where how to assess the impact of domestic responsibility to the effectiveness of working from home for both male and female workers. And the result is something that we already know, that 47 of women strongly agree that the domestic responsibility it's really affecting the effectiveness. It's really affecting the effectiveness of working from home. While only 29% of men agree, strongly agree, and 49% of men agree on a certain level. But what interesting from that survey, there's a different perception between male and female when they do the domestic responsibility, where men claim that they're already doing their part of domestic responsibility by playing with children. So not really taking care of the children, but playing with children. While for the most of the housework, they stated that they are working they are working together with their spouses. Where most more than half of a woman saying that the domestic responsibility, by taking care of the house and everything, is done by themselves, not really sharing with their spouses. So I think recognizing that situation where domestic responsibility, or we call it the unpaid care work, is still heavily put on women. It's something that the business community started to look at, but even so, 66% of all respondents claim that working from home and flexible working arrangement, it's effective for them. Okay, so I think this is something that we, to be honest, we are struggling to offering this or to promoting this menu or this arrangement to the private sectors in Indonesia, especially for the conventional companies whose the presence at the office, it's still counting for your promotion, and women with the part-time position will not have a chance to step up to the corporate ladders if this is the situation. And what make it worse, the data from ADB is 50% of Indonesian graduate from the third year education are women, 57%. But only 20% of those numbers are be able to be on the mid-level management. Only 5% can achieve a CEO level. If you know that, the data. It's quite famous on how far. And most of these women are, drop out from the workforce because of their domestic responsibility, because they have slightly chance on that one. So what we're trying to provide, what we're trying to do with our members is on how companies can recognize and giving the room for that. Yes, of course. There's always been a speaking when women have children, they lose focus. They're not losing focus, but they need to be providing, a space to be focusing on that one. At a certain point, the focus will go back. Yes, there's some kind of, some bad apples trying to put the situation, trying to put, okay, I have to put my children first and everything, then neglecting the work. Yes, there are some, but that's not only on women, but also on men, right? So I think, but at a certain level,
it's a cultural.
Women will refocus on themselves to the work.
Yeah. I mean, and that is a big cultural change, and it's a big cultural change for companies as well to be able to make that change. And Ayla, you were nodding your head very much during that conversation, and not during Maya's talk there. What do you have a response to make to that?
I was just nodding my head how you said, how you said that the attention goes to the children, but for women who are trying to juggle everything, their attention is enhanced, and they're trying to do everything. But a male's perspective is so different. That's what I was nodding my head about.
Yeah, it's very, very different. But it's true that, obviously flexible working and the way in which we have learnt so much from this time, and one of the major corporations here in Queensland was talking about this in a conversation the other day, is that we now know it can happen. That's the main thing. We now know that it can happen. So how are we going to change the working lives of both men and women now that we know it can happen, and now we know that companies can trust everybody to work from home. Now, we know that everybody doesn't have to go into the CBD, Central Business District, or wherever, to actually be in front of everybody to do their job. And it will be very interesting, won't it, coming out of this, to see just how far they are prepared to take that now, and whether people will start to drift back, or whether, as I think we've heard here, and I think you might want to come in on this, Leanne, is that this is a real opportunity also for the regeneration and development of regional towns and communities, where people can actually live, women and men included, can live in regional towns and communities and still have a very good job. Leanne.
Yeah, look, it's safe to say COVID provided us with really exciting behavioural science. When we start to see and think, I'm quite sure the way that we recruit people will change fundamentally. Even understanding who are extroverts and introverts. But I will say, you know, being isolated for a period of 3 months and working through the intensity of that crisis to try and bring together a working rhythm is a very different environment to commitments in being online or being in an isolated environment for years in the making. So when we've not yet seen the long-term effects of working in a compressed isolation state just yet, but definitely the early sort of stage results of COVID has seen an increased sense of productivity, in one respect, but then a heightened set of stress, and even, as you said, we're blurring the lines between work, life, and love. And so I think there's something healthy in compartmentalization in the same respect as well.
And I think also, I mean, that really interesting comment that Lisa Watego here from Queensland made in an earlier discussion on the local channel, the potential impact on design and design of both inner cities and office property, and design of the home space. If both partners are going to be working from home, it's not going to be redesigning it for women so that it is not going to be the male partner in the office and the woman in the kitchen also looking after the kids doing the work. How do we begin to think about design in that sense, and how can we innovate around issues around design? So the impacts are tremendous, aren't they, if you think across absolutely everything. Look, we've got little time left, so I'm going to go to each of you for a quick closing comment of the one thing that you would like to see happen that potentially comes out of Khara's policy, or if we were to create another major feminist manifesto for the economy moving forward post-global 24, what's the one thing that you would have in it in relation to your statement that should be there? No? And while you all think about it?
No. Well, okay, I'll start. Well, what I would like to see from this COVID recovery economy process, that there will be a lot of companies that open their mind about this flexible working arrangement and how it can be benefiting for the female talent, so they don't have to drop out from the workforce and stay being economically empowered. And then the other thing, of course, they will need support on that one. And childcare facility, it's something not really familiar in Indonesia, because the setting of our country, you still have, extended family to help taking care of your children. But in the setting of the urban, especially like location like Jakarta, childcare facility, it's something really needed, for these women. And I think beyond the government regulation, it will be great to see how, the business community or the private sectors can take a lead on this. But, in the sense, it's good for their business. If their employee can put their children on the good childcare facility, it will make them focus to the work, and it will increase the productivity. Some business cases has been presented in Indonesia, and I'm sure that we can reach that, because this pandemic, it's actually forced everybody to open their mouth about flexible working arrangement.
Fantastic. Leanne, if I could come quickly to you.
Yeah, look, I thought it was really interesting when we merged home and family life together. I had a great appreciation for algebra, which of course I skipped in the last 20 years, and my children had a great appreciation for the work that I was doing, which was a great conversation to be had around the dinner table, because the reality is this pledge to lifelong learning is a commitment, and we've got the ability with micro credentials to learn in fast spurts. So I'd love to say 4-day working weeks. We will be working 5 days, of course. 4-day working weeks on operations, but 1 day on a pledge to lifelong learnings, and have this sort of, the spurts of knowledge, which I think is critical in a time like this.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And Ayla,
Wonderful.
over
I
to
like
you.
that.
I think coming out of COVID, one of the biggest highlights has been our frontline workers, and I think it's an opportunity to keep that light there, to value our women in those jobs that are usually underpaid, or they're not seen, like in healthcare. So I think it's about using the momentum that's been built since COVID to start to value our frontline workers. And also in lockdown, I was the same. I felt like that was the most connection I had with my neighbors, with my family. COVID was an amazing time to just enjoy the basic things. So that one extra day in the week for lifelong learning is a cool idea. 4 days, yeah.
Wonderful. And for young people, any particular thinking about the young people that you're working with, and for them moving forward to have a really good part in the economy of the future in New Zealand, and how that would work.
Oh man, I think the COVID experience really highlighted how important it was to utilize technology, because all of our kids were learning from home, and it also highlighted how massive the gap is for Maori and Pacifica kids who don't have access to devices or Wi-Fi and those basic things that they should have. Um, I think it's just really important that our kids get the same kind of opportunities to use technology, because as we saw through COVID, it was the only way they were learning. Most of our kids' programs were online, but I know there were the other things like baking and cooking and gardening, but yeah, technology was a big thing for us through COVID.
Yeah, and I would say that through, I mean, also the digital divide between rural, regional, and remote areas. Certainly, it's still a major issue here in
Mm.
Australia. And I'm assuming it's the same in Indonesia, Maya, in terms of
Yes,
access to.
it's the same. I think it's even severe here since we are diverse in 17,000 islands, and most of my folks and colleagues especially in eastern part of Indonesia, is still not having enough access for this kind of technology. So this pandemic is actually making it worse, but it shined the light to the things that we need to put in place. The focus on infrastructure where the government should put in place. I think
Okay.
that's the things that we need to focus as well.
Okay, I'm going to have to draw this session to a close, unfortunately. I'd like to thank you all very much for being part of this. It's been tremendous, to Wow Global 24 for making this happen. One thing that we didn't get to was value, and the issue of measuring value. And if we can measure value beyond GDP, and to bring our social and environmental and cultural capital to bear, that will create the better future for us all. So thank you so much for being with us.